Hi, everyone. This is Lisa Lunghofer. I'm the Executive Director of the Gray Muzzle Organization. I'm joined by my colleague, Amanda Grant, and we are thrilled that you are here with us this afternoon, and we are even more excited to have Dr. Ernie Ward with us, who's going to be presenting on feeding strategies to avoid and treat weight gain in older dogs. Dr. Ward is one of our advisory board members, and he's the founder of the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention, the world's most recognized authority on dog and cat weight issues. He's spent the last 20 years researching, teaching, writing about, and treating pet obesity. So he is clearly an expert, and we are delighted that he is joining us today to speak on this topic. So just some housekeeping before I turn the floor over to Dr. Ward. If you would like to ask questions, please feel free. You can enter your questions in the question box if you're joining via Zoom. If you're joining by Facebook, please feel free to type your questions into the comment box. And Amanda and I will be fielding those questions and sharing them with Dr. Ward. Probably we'll keep them till the end of the presentation. We'll have about 15 minutes for discussion at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Ward. Thanks again for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Lisa. Amanda, thank you for all the important work that you're doing to help our beloved gray muzzles out there. And it's really an honor and privilege to be here with you today. I mean, obviously we share at least one thing in common, is that we love older dogs. And that's a really special kind of love, because not only in many instances have we spent considerable amount of time getting to know this amazing being, but for others, this is something that we sort of rescued from sometimes a very tragic situation. So this is an organization I am just proud and honored to be a part of. And so today we're going to talk about a really important aspect, and that is their feeding. And so we're going to have some slides today, and I'm going to walk through sort of a presentation similar to what I actually give to veterinary professionals all over the world. And we're going to make sure that we have plenty of time to answer your questions. So start, loading them up, whether you're on Facebook Live, whether you're on Zoom, if you're here with us today, because we really want to make sure that we get to the issues that you find most pressing and challenging with our senior pets. And so if we just kind of start looking at this, let's start out with number one, how you can find out more about me. And I'd really appreciate it if you go over to Instagram. You can do it right now on your smartphone and just hit that follow button on Instagram at Dr. Ernie Ward. You can certainly follow me on Facebook, where I also post the very similar types of content, as well as Twitter at Dr. Ernie Ward, and on YouTube at Dr. Ernie Ward. And also something that I do once a week is the Veterinary Viewfinder podcast. And so while it is tailored towards veterinary professionals, there's a lot of topics that we cover with experts all around the globe that you might find interesting as pet parents out there. So definitely hit me up out there. We'll be talking more about my plant-based pet food company as we get into this, but wherever you are, definitely hit me up on social media. Let's look at the numbers. And the 2018 is the last time we did a national survey. So we are the organization, the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention, that does all of those studies and cites the figures and facts that you hear in the news. We were scheduled to do it in October this year, but we have decided, our board and myself have decided to delay it until the spring of 2021. Right now, as many of you have experienced, veterinary clinics are overwhelmed trying to adapt to curbside services. So we just felt it was inappropriate to try to ask them to do one more thing, to do additional body condition scoring and measurement. So that's going to be tabled just a few months till we get to some more clarity on this issue. But if we look at the data, and honestly, I don't expect these, we've been tracking this, we'll show you for some time. We don't expect big movements one way or the other, but about 60% of our nation's cats are overweight, and about 56% of our nation's dogs. And we do break this down into a little more specific criteria. So we break them out on a body condition scale of 1 to 9. And so that's something that your veterinarian should conduct every time you go into the vet. So the next time you're at your vet's, I want you to make sure you ask for the BCS. So Dr. Ward, what's Buster's BCS? Make sure you ask that every time, because it is important to track it, especially over time. We find that most dogs, like many people, tend to gain weight as we age. But if we break it down, you can see that the majority here, sort of fit into these two categories of overweight and obese. Obviously for cats, the obesity category is is greater than for dogs. And there are several physiological reasons for this that are kind of out of the purview of today's conversation. But be aware that, you know, when we're talking about dogs, we typically talk about more of the category overweight than obesity. And for cats, this is really a real challenge. And this is why many of you probably have known someone with a diabetic cat. Remember that diabetes is directly related to adipose or fat tissue in cats, and dogs behave slightly different physiologically. And that's why we don't see as many dogs who have diabetes that even have obesity. But again, the numbers here, 50 million, 56 million. This is not a small problem. You know, when I first started really embarking on the journey of pet obesity back in about 2002, 2003, you know, nobody really was tracking it. And that's one of the real reasons that we started petobezityprevention.org. You can do me a favor by actually going over to the website today and signing up. We actually have not only a prevalence study that's done in veterinary clinics, but we also ask pet parents. Every year we have a survey that asks your attitudes about nutrition, about, you know, pet food, about obesity and exercise. And it really helps us as professionals to not only develop better treatments, quite frankly, but also people in the industry to innovate and iterate on existing products. So if we do look at it over time, you can see there is a slight gradual upward trend. If you go back from 2012 to 2016, if you kind of just slowly track it up, and you can see if you extend out to 2018, it equals about 56%. So again, we do expect this just slow, gradual march upwards. You know, people always ask, when do we reach the inflection point and go downwards? And we're just not. We're just not. We sadly, similar to human obesity in the United States, we continue to see these gradual upswellings. And so, you know, cats, again, hanging out right around the 58 to 60%. One of the things too that we've really been working on the past 4 years is what we call the Global Pet Obesity Initiative. And that is, right now we have 25 of the world's largest veterinary organizations that have signed on to this position statement. I encourage you to take a look at it, but basically we've tried to standardize the definition of obesity. If you can believe it or not, up until we started really getting this signed by all the worldwide vet organizations, there was not a definition of obesity, you know. So right now we've got one that's been largely agreed upon. And I know for many people, they think, well, that's just details. But the reality is those definitions actually help us determine appropriate treatments and even reimbursements in many countries, including the US, where pet insurance might be a factor. We also went ahead and tried to adopt a universal body condition score. Of major organizations signed this, there were 3 major BCS scales. And so when people would say, I have a patient who's a BCS of 4, the next question out of my mouth or any veterinary professional's mouth would be, which scale are you using? Which obviously is ridiculous. Even comparing in the literature, the scientific literature, we would have to first of all back up and say, wait, which scale are they using? So now we've all adopted the 1 to 9. You can find out more on the website for that. And then, of course, the most contentious and arguably the most challenging aspect of this entire thing is getting obesity in animals classified as a disease, as many of you are familiar with. WHO, CDC, you know, AMA, the American Medical Association, many years ago declared obesity a disease in humans. And what this did was accelerated innovation amongst treatments. And that's why you see in human obesity, they've got now, over 15 FDA approved drugs, innumerable bariatric surgical procedures, and we have what in the US for pets? Nothing. There are no approved treatments for pet obesity in the United States. So you can see where people like me who are very interested in this are going, are you kidding me? And what the pharmacology industry says is, hey, you know, Ernie, it's not a disease. So there's really, why would we develop a drug for something that's not a problem? So we're working really tirelessly with the American Veterinary Medical Association. If you want to get on board, you can do me a favor. Again, sign up over at petobezityprevention.org. Again, we are not associated, funded, in any way affiliated with pet food companies. And so I think it's really important for us to tell the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, this is an important topic to you as pet owners. Today, we want to focus in on why this is important. And I think many of you probably have the question, does it really matter? Does this adversely affect my pet's quality of life? Many of you, you know, I believe many pet parents are skeptical about like the health benefits. Oh, well, so what if Fluffy is a couple extra pounds? She's happy. Well, I really want to focus on the quality of life. And we've looked at this through several studies. One of my dear friends, Dr. Alex German over at the University of Liverpool in the UK, he has really spent the past decade looking at quality of life effects. And certainly we've seen that. And when we take people with dogs with obesity and we go through a validated quality of life score, they all say, hey, my dog is suffering in some way. And it can be as simple as inability to get into the car, to walk up the steps, to go upstairs in a house, difficulty when they're bathing because it seems to fall down. I mean, there are many issues that obesity sort of factor in and contribute to decreasing the quality of life. The great news is that based on Dr. German and others' research, and certainly I can back this up with my experience, is that it just takes a little bit of weight loss for these dogs to demonstrably improve in quality of life. So many times I'm dealing with a 110-pound Labrador Retriever who's 9 or 10 years old. And the owner's like, I just don't get it. What am I going to do? I want him to be happy the last few years of his life. And while I believe they're probably accelerating the demise of that beautiful pet, what they find is that if that pet loses about 6 to 8 pounds, they have an improvement, a demonstrable, observable, remarkable improvement in quality of life. So when people ask me about quality of life issues around obesity and why am I so passionate about obesity, it's because we can improve their quality of life. And isn't that really what we're supposed to do anyway? I mean, isn't that the beauty of living with dogs and cats? But we've really entered into this era where, particularly in the United States, and again, I have the good fortune of being involved with a lot of research and presenting all over the world. And this is almost unique to the US, where pet food has become this third rail, this radioactive topic. This, I make a joke for the past several years. If you want to start a fight, just ask somebody what they feed their dog. And I think that it's really affecting the way we make recommendations as veterinary professionals, because it is so contentious that, quite frankly, many veterinarians tell me, Ernie, I'm not bringing up pet food, dog food, cat food, weight loss in the exam room because I'm going to get my head chewed off by that pet parent. And they're right. I mean, I certainly bear the brunt of this on social media every time, when I do make different recommendations and statements and really just stating the scientific evidence. But we, as pet parents, I would really encourage you to remain open-minded, really evaluate the evidence and scientific literature. Many of the things that you think are true may not be as true as we once thought they were. I mean, the field of nutrition is constantly in flux. We are making tremendous advancements in our understanding of basic physiology and biology, and nutrition is still, poorly understood. So when we start to reinvent things, we can't just become argumentative and dogmatic in our beliefs, because it is truly slowing down progress. So I think this is really important. I mean, you're a veterinarian and you need to have a real cogent, authentic, genuine, open conversation about your pet's weight, about what its body condition is, about what you're feeding it, because that's for their health, that's for their quality of life, that's for their longevity. I mean, we're not doing this, despite the internet rumors of, veterinarians somehow having a financial kickback. I mean, that's all nonsense. It truly is. Certainly that's never been my experience, nor do I know any colleagues that have experienced that. We're really doing it because we love animals. I mean, that's why we dedicated our lives. Since I was 7 years old, I've known I would only be here to serve animals, particularly dogs and cats. And of course, then as an adult, I chose, to really get into nutrition and obesity. So we're only doing it with your pet's best interests in mind. So really, let's have those conversations. Let's talk about some of our survey results over the past couple of years. And this gets back to that 2018. And this is why I really would appreciate if you could go to petobesityprevention.org and sign up to participate in these surveys. We only ask it once a year. It takes just a few minutes, but this data really helps us shape, the advances that we're making as professionals. And when we look at this, and we do surveys both of veterinary professionals and pet parents like yourselves, about 80% of vet professionals and nearly 70% of pet owners reported that they had tried to help their pet lose weight. Now, this tracks nicely especially with the percentage of American adults that say that they have tried some kind of diet or weight loss program over the past year. That consistently is 2/3 to 3/4 of American adults. We've all tried something, or we're trying something, or heaven forbid, as soon as the holidays are over, we're definitely going to try something to get ready for the next season. How do they do it? They typically feed smaller portions. They try to increase exercise, which isn't always the best option, quite frankly, and we'll talk about that more why. Some try a low-calorie, low-fat pet food, and then only about 19% try quote-unquote prescription weight loss diet. These are typically defined as therapeutic diets. These are diets that you would typically get from your veterinary office. When we then ask them, well, did it work or not? You can see the numbers here, and I apologize. I kind of just, whoops, I kind of wrote over that, but really not. 33% said calorie reduction worked. 30% said that increased exercise, low calorie, and, even the therapeutic diets, 14% said somewhat or very effective. So you can see that here's the thing, people try stuff, okay, and it doesn't work. All right. So that's the dilemma. And that is getting back to the original thing where I said, hey, guess what? The only treatment that veterinarians have available to you today, if your beautiful senior dog has obesity, the only treatment that I can prescribe in the United States is this: feed less, exercise more. And clearly, and we know from our own scientific studies that just doesn't work. We need additional tools in our arsenal. There was a drug that was out over about 15 years ago that really did not work very well and had some side effects, including really bad diarrhea. And so, I think that some veterinarians got turned off by that. But then when you look at the amazing advancements, especially along some of the weight loss tools in human medical field, it's just, we're just all sitting there going, wow, why don't we have some of this? We also ask pet owners, where do they get their best dietary recommendations? So what to feed their pet. Really happy to see, again, most people still value their veterinarian. The second, of course, was the internet, and third would be the pet store. I don't expect that's changed a lot. I expect, this continues to sort of nudge over and almost equal to, or sometimes even surpass veterinary recommendations. I think during the time of COVID-19, there's probably been a lot more reliance on internet in general, but that's just something. So when we get into now, that's just sort of setting up the story, but I think it's important for you to have some color and context to this issue and how big it is, and maybe some of the drivers and motivators for veterinary professionals. But the questions that we really have to focus on today are: what pet food do you feed? How much do you feed? And even how often can play a minor role, but it's still important to sort of ascertain. And then how many treats do you give, okay? And again, I've got some resources here. This is a longevity project that I started back in 2015. Of course, definitely check out Pet Obesity. And all of these questions really are me I'm trying to answer them in different ways through different avenues, right? So whether it's doing nonprofit outreach through Association for Pet Obesity Prevention, whether it's doing, scientific high biotech, research, trying to incentivize people to do research in veterinary profession, especially to extend longevity, through Project 25. And then of course, even commercially, like developing what I think are better dog food and pet food. So again, I'm constantly seeking to answer these questions and to give people real solutions. And that's just my own personal thing. Well, why should we talk about this today? I mean, why are we here? Because we care. I care desperately about this, and you care because you're here today. And really, when we look at of all the things, as we're going to say repeatedly throughout the day, all the things you can do to help your pet live a longer, healthier, disease-free, pain-free life, it is to keep them at a healthy body condition. I mean, that is without a doubt. Of all the things that we have power over in our own personal lives, it is to maintain a healthy body condition. And this is, of course, done through a combination of diet and exercise, getting back to those treatments, but more importantly, it's the attention and awareness. I think that's, as you'll see, we're going to talk about that. Now, when we talk about obesity, we have to be clear. When people have a dog with obesity, they tend to see it as a big dog, okay? I mean, everybody thinks their dog is like an NFL linebacker or an NBA center or a goalie for a hockey team, right? It's the big, my dog's big. And I can't tell you how many times people really do sort of misidentify this, right? And we know from human research that people do this themselves. I mean, there are plenty of men my height, 5'8", that weigh, you know, another 50 or 60 pounds than me. And they're like, well, I'm a big guy. And it's like, we're the same size. I weigh 139. Why do you weigh, you know, 200 pounds? You're not a big guy. You know, I mean, maybe you're a bodybuilder, maybe, but most of they're not. And so we do misidentify. And so when we see this big dog, that downplays and diminishes the health impacts, right? Because she's big, but is it big or is it something else? Now, if I've done my job over the last 20 years, vets see a dog with obesity, okay? So now this is now getting into the medical end of the thing. So now we say, well, it's not just a large dog. This is a dog with a medical condition. This is a dog, as we're going to show, that has chronic inflammation, which is what I see. So when I see a picture like this of young, old dog cat, I see chronic inflammation. And of all the things that you do in your life, there's really two things, and they're really kind of the same thing. Number one, try to keep your blood sugar relatively stable. Okay, this goes for dogs and cats and people. Cats, obviously, physiologically slightly different, but you know, again, these big glycemic spikes that we see after eating sugars and carbs, it's just not healthy. Why? Because it then triggers an entire inflammatory cascade, getting me back to the real nemesis. Now, this is a relatively new area of research and science. It wasn't until 2014 that actually the connection between fat tissue, adipose tissue, and inflammatory mediators, inflammation was finally made. In the Journal of Endocrinology, in the January kickoff issue of the year, they published, the entire edition was dedicated to metabolic inflammation secondary to adipose tissue. And so it was, again, that's what is that, just 6-7 years ago now, almost 7 years. And so they were the first to state, you know, with clear scientific evidence, adipose tissue secretes an array of hormones, which again, we now call adipokines, or some people are using a term adipocytokines, slight difference, but you know, it means the same thing essentially, that's been causally linked to a wide range of metabolic diseases. 2014, that's the first time this statement was made, was declared a scientific fact, that fat tissue has been causally linked to metabolic diseases. Prior to this, people were still, you know, of course, speculating, and there's a lot of research to support it, but there really wasn't this amalgam of evidence that says, nope, this is the fact. Obesity creates a state of chronic low-grade inflammation. And so for people like me and others, of course, many, many great researchers on the human and veterinary side, you know, this is what we were screaming from the mountaintops. We were saying, look, it's not just that they're fat. It's not just that they have extra fat tissue. What is that extra fat tissue doing? It's secreting these adipokines, these adipocytokines that are leading to chronic inflammation, which leads to metabolic disorders and dysregulation. And again, metabolic inflammation links obesity to a broad spectrum of pathological conditions. So I think it's really, number one, it's scientifically incorrect to assume, but I think it's counter to popular wisdom that, you know, this is an aesthetic condition. This is just something that looks bad. Like, well, if I wanted to look good in a bikini, then I would lose it. Or if I wanted my dog to be svelte, you know, then we would do that. You have to understand that that extra padding that your older dog has around its chest, throughout its abdomen, around its hips, that is biologically active. In fact, it's arguably some of the most biologically active tissue in the body. We actually refer to adipose tissue in the abdomen as the second pancreas. Now, the pancreas is the very active organ in your abdomen next to your stomach that secretes a whole host of hormones that influence everything from digestion to sleep to muscle repair. And so we're saying fat tissue is as active as that. That's why we don't jokingly refer to it, but we refer to it as sometimes the second pancreas. It's that active. Now, I was honored to be one of the co-authors on the 2014 American Animal Hospital Association paper about obesity and pets. And so one of the things that we did was we sort of looked at the literature, carefully examined what were clear evidence for causality. So obesity leads to these conditions. And it was pretty simple. Number one, reduced life expectancy, diminished quality of life. And in fact, we're going to show you some amazing research that's been done that some of you may be familiar with. Skin disorders. I mean, I will say there's a couple of great colleagues in Japan that have been all over this topic for years. And it really wasn't until 2014 when we kind of said, look, there's enough evidence here to state clearly that skin disorders are associated with excess fat, obesity. Orthopedic disease, no surprise there. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Cancer, cancer, cancer. I mean, every month there's a new study supporting or uncovering a new form of cancer that's directly related to obesity. Metabolic endocrine disorders, I mean, people often think about diabetes, and that's really a very important one. Breathing problems, kidney disease. Remember that chronic kidney disease, kidney failure. It was interesting in my book, Chow Hounds, published way back in 2010, I uncovered a lot of research from the 1970s that when they were doing heart disease research in Mississippi. And they were taking dogs, beagles, and they were, of course, giving them obesity. And what they found was these dogs were developing terrible kidney failure, chronic kidney disease. And then, of course, we talked about chronic inflammation. So again, it's really important. This is getting back to what's often referred to as the Purina lifetime study. They actually took 2 colonies of labs, and they took them from puppyhood till they died, and did this massive research. This has been replicated. Another company did that as well a few years later. But the big take-home message, I think, that everybody knows, what they did was they gave a control group fed normal calories. And so basically they fed them according to the normal recommendations, as well as what the dogs, wanted to eat. So if the dogs wanted a little more, they would often give them extra, food and so forth. And then whatever this group was fed, okay, whatever they chose to eat, the normal calories, variance, based on heat and humidity and so forth, they fed the other cohort 25% less. So you can see this is a really interesting, we call this feeding ad libitum. So we want to feed it to the need, to the desire, which is how most people feed their dog. And then what if we reduce that amount by 25%? And as you can see, here was the big takeaway, was that those dogs that were fed 25% fewer calories lived about 2 years longer. But it gets so much better than that. And if you put it in human perspectives, that's a 16% increase. That would be like you living from 79 years of age to 91. I don't know about you, but I want the 91, because here's where it gets super cool, okay? If you look at the data and you start to slice and dice a little more, if you wanted to say how many of those labs were alive at 13 years of age, well, the dogs that were fed the normal, regular amount of food, only 4% were alive at 13 years of age, yet 50% of the dogs fed just 25% fewer calories. I mean, this is not like caloric restriction. This isn't like starvation. This isn't deprivation. This is just feeding a little less. 1 cup becomes 3/4 cup. And 50%. I mean, I want to be in that cohort all day long. I do want to point out one key thing too that we've learned over the past 5 years in particular is that the link between obesity, arthritis, inflammation is really solid at this point. We look at these different, I kept talking about how the adipose tissue is secreting all these hormones and biomodulators, all these chemicals and compounds and proteins and so forth. We know now, I mean, there's a list of at least 5 to 6 that are directly causing damage to joints. And so many of these older dogs that have obesity start to really break down with osteoarthritis. And so I just want you to understand that there is a direct link. I mean, sure, wear and tear and injury is part of the issue, without a doubt. Excessive loading factors on joints. So again, you're putting an extra 10 or 15 pounds on a hip or a knee or elbow or shoulder. That's going to lead to breakdown, damage, direct injury to the joint capsule and so forth, and support structures around it. But at the same time, you've got a compounding factor with increased inflammation in that joint space. So I just really, for me, this whole thing started getting kicked off about 20, 30 years ago in humans. They started saying, why do people with obesity have more osteoarthritis in non-weight bearing joints? They were looking at wrist and hands in particular. So it's fascinating research, but it's directly translatable to dogs. So this leads me to the statement of obesity is a chronic inflammatory disease. It's our pet's most dangerous health threat, without a doubt. I mean, I've been bold in proclaiming that for many, many years. Again, there's a lot of different resources that you can look at. I mean, you can still, get on Amazon and elsewhere. My book from 2010, Chow Hound, just a great overview of the entire issue. 2014, the AHA guidelines, I think that's a great resource as well. I also was a co-author of Vet Clinics. That's more of a veterinary textbook. My last two books here, The Clean Pet Food Revolution, which came out in December, and then last October, Better You, Better Dog, Better Life. That's 30 Days to Happiness with Your Best Friend. A lot of testimonials. Co-wrote that with a couple of really good peers in the space as well. And so those are nice. I've got another textbook chapter for veterinarians coming out very soon. So if you're interested in some of these resources, definitely check them out. Some of them are out there. So as we now shift into the last little part of this today, which, now we want to get to the prescriptives. Like, what do? You have to make sure, especially with older dogs, that we rule out any underlying medical conditions. Hypothyroidism should be ruled out in every case of dog canine obesity. Like, you cannot convince me that it's not worth running a thyroid panel on any dog of any age, but particularly in older dogs, before we embark on this journey, because I have seen innumerable cases on second and third opinions over the years where they've been trying this diet and that diet and this exercise and nothing's working. The dog just weight keeps creeping up, and I just bring them in. We do a blood panel. And it's like, your dog has thyroid disease, and we put on a thyroid supplement, and voila, you're the hero. So please don't do that. You don't need people like me as a second or third opinion or referral. Rule out those medical conditions, other diseases, other medications, okay? Like seizure medications are notorious. Steroids for allergies are notorious for contributing to fat deposition or fat accumulation. So let's rule out medicines and diseases first. Cushing's disease. I mean, there's several diseases that we really want to rule out, but thyroid, that's what I want you to remember. Maybe your dog has specific mobility restrictions because it's an older dog. Maybe it blew out its cruciate when it was 5 years old playing Frisbee one day in the park. That will factor into how we construct and actually formulate a step weight loss program. What medications we mentioned, and what's your ability and commitment, and what's your motivation? I find that sometimes people just aren't motivated. The veterinarian goes and says, we need to do this and this and this, and they just aren't into it. And, it's just not going to work out. And I would say, this is a judgment-free zone. I have plenty of clients over the years who just they weren't ready for it. The timing wasn't right. And so, as a veterinary professional, I'm going to keep bringing it up every year. So if you're in that situation where for whatever reason, you're just not able to or willing to, just accept that your vet's going to bring it up. Don't say anything. I don't want to hear about the weight loss, because we're just doing our jobs. Okay. How much should you feed? Again, if you go to the website, we have tons of charts based on breeds and age and sex and all this kind of stuff. But there's really three main, calculations that we use. The most accurate, without a doubt, is we sometimes refer to this as the exponential formula. And so it's 70 times ideal body weight in kilograms to the 0.75 power or 0.75 power. That math might be tough for some of us. So 30 times ideal body weight in kilograms plus 70 gets you close. This one doesn't work for really small, like little teacup chihuahuas, and it doesn't work for like Great Danes and Mastiffs. So it's sort of, at the edges, this formula will fall apart a little bit, which is why we look at this. This is actually looking at a surface area of the body. So there's a scientific reason why that one's a little more precise. But, honestly, for most dogs, unless it's a little teacup or a giant breed, this is going to get you in the ballpark. And then for weight loss, this is typically where we start. And so when you look at what I've published and in my books, and certainly what we've published in textbooks as well, it's about 80% of those calories is kind of where we begin. And people always say, well, Ernie, why do you reduce the calories by 20% already? It's because most of these dogs are going to be older adults, okay? They're going to be spayed or neutered. And by removing the sex organs, we've already reduced the daily caloric requirements by 20 to 30%. So when people say this, I go, look, these dogs are largely inactive. You know, obviously if you're running a marathon, if you train for hiking and Frisbee and, you know, agility, then that's a different situation. Dog probably doesn't have obesity to begin with. But regardless, you know, these are lightly active dogs that have been, you know, surgically altered. And so we need to reduce, that's a starting point. So, you know, there are some good charts out there. I would encourage you though, you know, not to embark on this by yourself. You need to work with your veterinarian always. And what your veterinarian is going to do is we're going to construct something that probably looks like this. And that is, of course, if they're kind of up on some of the latest, if they read the textbooks and these articles and recommendations. And what we found is that by stepping down the weight, okay, so we actually set different caloric objectives. And look, I have some colleagues that, you know, they just prefer to go right to the end. The problem with this is you end up getting something called pestering, begging. You might know these behaviors. This is your older dog who decides to start waking up at 4 a.m. because they're hungry. And so by actually gradually adjusting these targets, this is why I call it the STEP weight loss program, we can help minimize some of those pestering and begging plateaus. If you go back and read Chowhounds, you'll read a really detailed, you know, explanation of why this works. But, you know, I kind of stumbled into this. I'm also a certified personal trainer and an Ironman coach. And, you know, we did this with a lot of our athletes and weight loss clients. And so, you know, it would be like, you just didn't say, well, suddenly let's go into starvation mode. You actually do kick into some metabolic adaptions that can sometimes lead to earlier plateauing of the weight. So, you know, there are some good scientific reasons for this. And I think, you know, over the last 20 years of me sort of continuing to use this strategy, you know, I think most people have found it works really, really well. But what about your older dog? What are some of the targets? Like, what's a safe amount of weight loss? Because again, we don't believe in starvation. This is not deprivation. We're not depriving them of anything. We want to make sure that we keep them nutritionally sound so their immune system is strong and they're able to repair muscles and bones and so forth. So really for older dogs and almost any adult dog, 3 to 5% of the current body weight per month. Okay. And if you're wondering about cats, it's about 1/2 pound a month. Okay. So if you've got a cat that needs to lose weight, it's really only about 1/2 pound a month that they can lose. So if we take a 90-pound dog, so it's a 90-pound lab that should probably weigh 75 pounds. Yeah, I'm talking to you labs out there. That would mean that about 3 to 5 pounds of weight loss per month. And the total time is going to be 3 to 4 months. So you can see on our little step weight loss, we maybe only need 1 step in between. You know, so I typically draw those steps out about every 90 days. That tends to be the most physiologically adaptive period. And then we sort of, once the body kind of gets used to that, we kind of hit them with another curveball as long as they're losing weight. As we sort of want to be mindful of time, because I want to get to questions. I know we're getting some good ones. And if you have a question, definitely start hitting in here. But without a doubt, the most common question that I get is, hey, Dr. Ward, what's the best food to feed my dog? And I'm going to tell you, it depends. And there is no best food. I make a great dog food. I've put all of my career and experience into the formulation of that food. And I will still say it's not perfect for every dog because we're all individuals. You know, I mean, I've been vegan and vegetarian for 32 years. Doesn't mean that it's going to be appropriate for you. So you really want to find the thing that works best for your lifestyle. And so here's sort of my, you know, back of the hand recommendations. Number one, whatever food you're feeding, your dog must like it. I can't tell you how many times I've prescribed a therapeutic weight loss diet only for the client to call me back a week later saying, yeah, I ditched the bag. He hated it. Right? It doesn't do any good. No matter how excellent nutritionally that food is, if your dog doesn't eat it, it's not going to help anybody. And I just see it so often. I recently was talking with a dog parent, and she was having trouble getting her dog to lose weight. And she said, I've been through 3 different diets or whatever. My dog just turns his nose up at everything. The only thing he wants is this one diet. And it was a horrible diet, by the way, high in calorie and carbs. And, you know, so I said, well, look, let's start there. Let's start with the flavor profile. Let's start with what is it that he likes about that? And honestly, we tried 2 different diets, and on the 3rd one, bam, we nailed it. We got something he liked. But that also comes back to, do you like it? Because sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to start a fight, you ask somebody what they feed their pet. And so, I can make a recommendation for a food. I have a plant-based dog food, okay? Because I'm trying to save the planet. But regardless, if you don't agree with it, if you don't like it, then it does us no good. So you have to be willing to work with your veterinarian. Even someone like me who has, pretty specific dietary belief and philosophies. I raised my family a certain way. My wife and I, believe in certain things. But I'm also open-minded. We are willing to make concessions. We have got to get back to civility in this country, people. I mean, we have got to be able to say, okay, if that doesn't work for you, what can work for us? Like, how can we make this work? Because otherwise, when we just turn and walk away, nobody is benefited. And most importantly, the pet suffers, right? So let's really do it. I'm also looking for something that's for weight loss here. And honestly, I even formulated my own food for this. I want low caloric density. So for example, we have like 330 calories per cup, but anything less than 350 kind of is a good starting point. Now, some of the therapeutic diets will be less than 300 calories per cup or calories per cup. But for most of us, as long as it's less than 350, this gives us a little bit of wiggle room. That will not work for every patient. That will not work for every step weight loss program that I try to formulate, but that just gives you a starting point, okay? What about convenience? People always want to say, well, what about wet food versus dry food versus raw food versus whatever? Really, you have to look at your lifestyle, because I find that sometimes people, or even the veterinarian, tries to insert the circle in the square hole, right? And that's just not going to work. So if you're a busy mom, you've got 2 jobs, you've got 3 kids. I mean, come on, this is America. I know what it's like out there. Yeah, maybe a dry kibble is going to work for you, because you've got to be consistent with it, because the convenience, and I often say convenience equals consistency, right? Because if it's convenient for you, you're going to do it more often, more regularly. You're more likely to adhere to my recommendation. In general, my own food, I formulated very specifically. I believe, and certainly the scientific evidence is very clear for humans and dogs, higher protein, higher fiber diets are a great start. Some dogs need higher fiber, lower protein. Some work with low fiber. I mean, you wind up finding that mix, that blend that works for you. But if you look at the evidence, the preponderance, the majority, the overwhelming consensus is you start off with higher protein, higher fiber, which is what we do. But most importantly, of all these things, you have to adhere to what I call the 90-day rule. At 90 days, you take a measurement. If you're not improving, if it's not getting demonstrable, observable improvements, then you switch it up. I cannot tell you how many times a dog parent has come into me. I've been feeding this special diet I got from my vet for the past year, and old Roscoe's gained 3 pounds on it. What the heck? Why were you feeding that for a year, right? At 90 days, that's when you make a switch. At 90 days, we either reduce the calories further, but remember, you can never reduce calories below 70% of RER, that calculation, because then you wind up running into risk of nutritional deficiencies. So now vitamins and minerals and macronutrients like proteins, carbs, and fats, we can get them all out of whack, causing severe problems. So you can only reduce so much. So you change formulation, you change brand, you change something, okay? But every 90 days, that's getting back to that whole step weight loss. You can see, I'm just constantly trying to challenge the physiology of the dog. Now let's talk about treats, okay? Dog treats, the old rule still holds true with a caveat. We always have said no more than 10% of a dog's daily calories should be comprised of treats. Now, this was primarily to make sure that they were getting a complete and balanced diet, okay? Because if you start adding in junk food treats, which remember, treats are not formulated to provide all of the vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients like fats, carbs, proteins, and so forth, for the dog's diet. So we were saying that's kind of junk treats. So 10%, if you go much beyond 90%, remember getting back to that 70%, they were in real trouble. So now you can see why we came up with the 10% rule. The problem is if your dog's trying to lose weight, you can't give them 10% of the daily calories. It's almost like, well, I'm trying to lose weight. So how are you doing that? Well, I drink only a 6-pack of beer a day. There are going to be other alterations that typically these are going to, carry with them. So if we're going to use treats, okay, especially with the older dog trying to lose weight, let's first and foremost make sure they have some functionality, okay? Do they help with joint health, okay? This is why I tend to like supplements that are tasty, right? And low calorie, of course. But I want to, if I'm going to give my dog something, I want them to be benefiting its health in some way. So skin and coat, digestion, hip and joint, right? I mean, this is just no-brainer stuff. And then if I need the extras, I go to crunchy vegetables. I love baby carrots, sliced zucchini, cucumbers. I mean, these are like on my dog's regular rotation, okay? My dogs love broccoli, as do most dogs out there. And if you're worried about gas, I mean, I really haven't seen that a problem. You have to get a lot of broccoli, I think. But regardless, you find something that's kind of crunchy to give them that satiety, but a vegetable, low calorie, low caloric density, you're adding in helpful nutrients. I'm a huge fan. Now, here, before we get to the questions, how can I tell if you're going to succeed? Because I can. The first thing is I always ask my clients, the pet parents, to conduct a 1-week feeding and activity log, okay? And we've got an online form they can use. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on a piece of paper. I don't care, because all I'm looking at is, do you actually do it? And if you do it, do you actually do it halfway decently, right? Because the people that don't do this, it's almost game over. I can predict who's going to fail, because I'll have people come in, best intentions. Hey, can you show me the food log? Yeah, you know, I gotta apologize. I thought my wife was going to do it, or I thought my husband was going to do it. Not going to happen. That dog most likely is not going to succeed because they don't have a parent that's just, they're not in the game. The second thing is, will they weigh the food? It is so important to get a precise amount of calories in these dogs, especially older dogs. And the smaller they are, the more this is compounded. And so we've done studies, gosh, and we've published a ton of this stuff where we've taken vet professionals, pet parents, you name it. We've tried every cohort imaginable, and we'll take them. It's a simple exercise that we do for the research. And we say, okay, measure out exactly 3/4 or 1/2 of a cup. So we just give them a measuring cup, a precise measuring cup, and we say, do this. And then we take that amount that they did and we weigh the food. And we find that no matter how precise, accurate, how much time a veterinary professional or pet parent takes, that there's going to be at least a 10% variation. 10% doesn't sound like a lot. We did a study in 2006 with Pet Obesity Prevention. We took the top dog and cat foods at the time, okay? And we said, what would happen if a pet owner just overfeeds by even less than 10% a day? So we took 10 additional kibbles a day, 10 like little meow mix kibbles, like 10 of those a day, 10 little tiny Purina dog foods, right? And we only looked at dogs less than 22 kilograms, or I'm sorry, 22 pounds, 10 kilograms, because as I mentioned, it's compounded for smaller dogs. So dogs that are under 22 pounds, that's where we started looking at, and of course, cats. We found that feeding an extra 10 kibbles, 10 little tiny pieces of dry dog food, cat food a day equaled 1 pound of weight gain per year. I mean, just do the math, right? So this is why when we say weigh the food, we mean it. You can buy one of these little kitchen things. They're like 10, 20 bucks. You can buy them on Amazon, Kmart, Walmart, whatever. But this is your secret right here. This is how I weigh. I mean, this is, and once you get used to it, literally, we just have a cup. We put it on there. It's tared. You pour the food in till you get to the, you know, however many ounces or grams that you're supposed to feed, and you're done. Because remember, you're using a volumetric measurement. So you're using volume, but actually food is calculated by mass, by weight. So this is where that difference really becomes important. Are you able to get some activity? And then again, getting back to this motivated pet parent, you know, you can almost tell the people that are going to finish the Ironman, that are going to reach their weight loss goals, they're going to finish the marathon. I mean, as a coach and a personal trainer, you can almost tell it because there's this intrinsic motivation, right? You know, they're not just there because they got to be there. They're not just there because they want to be there. And they're not there just because of vanity, you know, because vanity will not sustain. It's that deeper thing that you kind of sense. All right, so want to quickly get to those questions. What do I recommend? Food puzzles, food puzzles. I don't really, you know, over the years, there's been so many advances in this. I don't care. I've got like 4 that I rotate with my 2 terriers. And we do believe in rotating it because, again, we're trying to keep them mentally stimulated and engaged. Automated feeders, hit or miss, like we still don't have that holy grail that I'm looking for, but for many pet parents, this can be a viable solution. I'd encourage you to take a look and talk to your vet about what's available. Really making them learn to earn. So every feeding, every meal, it's really essential that you give them something to do. So whether it's working outside on sit down, stay, whatever, whether it's right before feeding, it's a sit down, stay, you know, however you want to do it. But you really want, I believe that you want to make the food act to be also a learning opportunity, because most dogs are highly food motivated. So why not get a twofer, right? So you're going to get feeding, but also, hey, let's work on, you know, sit down, stay, paw, whatever it is that you're doing. Another thing I do with my dogs, and certainly we recommend it with many owners, is, you know, just trying to vary where we feed them, right? Because it does get kind of static and stale. And sometimes just encouraging the dog or cat in particular to move around the house. So change the feeding, you know, even split the feeding up. If you have one dog, it's really cool to take, like I take the little soy sauce bowls and we'll put them throughout the house and let them kind of find it. So again, engage it. What about exercise? Really, the recommendation hasn't changed for 20 years for people and pets. 20 to 30 minutes for sure a day of sustained walk or play. You can divide this up. You do see diminishing returns and results on that, but about 30 minutes a day. And that's just kind of what you need to do if you own a dog. Intervals or agility. I spent a lot of time writing and developing different types of exercise strategies, really based on a lot of what I do with athletes and do in my own training. But, you know, intervals and agility are great for, especially for a dog that doesn't have any pre-existing conditions. Swimming, and of course, activity monitors are definitely getting better. We still, again, don't have that perfect mix yet, but they're pretty darn good, and I would encourage you to do that. Canned versus dry doesn't make a difference. It's about calories, right? Remember that thing I said earlier? Does your dog like it? Do you like it? Is it convenient? Can you adhere to it? Like, so if this does it for you and your dog, fine, go for it. You know, we will find a formulation that works for you. If not, you find the other, but there's no difference. There are some things that we're working on actively. Myself and along with a handful of others, especially in the US and the UK, we've been looking at different intermediate feeding strategies for dogs and cats. So there is some early evidence that there might be some cool things that we can do there. Microbiome, again, Dr. Holly Gantz with Animal Biome out in Berkeley, California, just a wonderful, wonderful company. And again, we're actively looking at the influence of the microbiome. Genetics, you've probably seen, there's been a lot of research over the past decade showing that genetics is an important part of pet obesity and dog obesity. Environmental pollutants, you know, come on, people. BPA, you know, these are again, immunomodulators. These are hormones that in very micro doses actually influence the physiology. And so, of course, there's been tons of studies linking BPA with obesity, and it's quite frightening. So plastics in particular, and do not think that all plastics out there are BPA free. So, I mean, we do need to pay attention to the packaging that is used for pet foods for sure. And of course, you know, my whole bag is about fiber. You know, that's where a lot of my active research with Wild Earth is. And so the type of fiber that I am most interested in are the beta glucans. You're probably starting to hear about that on the human side. It's something that I just packed into every product that I make. I'm really, I'm a big fan of beta glucans in my own life. All right. So again, thank you, Gray Muzzle. Let's jump to some questions here. Hit me up wherever you are. I mean, I'm in all the places, so I'd love to hear from you. Definitely LinkedIn, you know, Twitter, Instagram. Do me a huge favor, really, to do that. And don't forget, you know, if you're into the podcast thing, Veterinary Viewfinder, you can listen to that anywhere. I mean, Spotify, iTunes, whatever. So we will jump into some questions now. Linda, Lisa, and Amanda, I guess we will jump into some of your questions here.
Yes. I think it looks like most of the questions are on Zoom. Do you want to jump in there, Amanda?
Sure. One question that just came in a second ago is pumpkin okay? Canned pure pumpkin.
Yeah, pumpkin's great. I use it. In fact, I have a supplement that, you know, it's got pumpkin and probiotics. Yes, so I'm a big believer in pumpkin. You know, obviously it depends on why we're using that, but as you know, it's a nice mixture of soluble and insoluble fibers. Just make sure that, again, you're using like canned pumpkin. I think there's like some pie fillings out there that are just loaded with sugar. So we want to avoid anything that has added sugar, but I'm a big fan of pumpkin, and it helps a lot of dogs, especially older dogs, with the regularity. This is primarily through modulating microbiome. So it's, as I mentioned, there's two types of fibers that are included in there, and these serve largely, you know, as pre and postbiotics. So they actually are helping nourish the gut microbiome. You know, at one time, people thought it was an osmotic effect or drawing water. I think you have to feed an awful lot of it to do it. So I think it's probably, the evidence now is more pointing towards the fiber manipulation of microbiome. So it's a great question, but yep, I'm a fan of pumpkin. And it's pumpkin season almost.
Right. Okay, another question. Can you explain what percentage of fiber should be present in dry dog food? The brand I'm using is 6%, which as I listen to you doesn't sound great.
Yeah, and it depends. There's a lot of particulars that's probably on an as-fed basis. So you have to remove the moisture. So it depends on if it's dry or if it's wet. And again, fiber is a tricky one because if you go too far in one direction or the other, too much or too little, you can, of course, disrupt the microbiome and lead to constipation or diarrhea. And so I don't typically recommend an amount because it's going to depend on the individual. I can tell you that 6% is more standard. In my opinion, it's far too low. I think that, you know, most dogs can do much better, up to 2 or more times that, but certainly when you start to get around, you know, the low double digits, I think that's going to be more appropriate. Remember, the game here is where we, you know, what are we putting in that food, whether it's a canned, whether it's, you know, fresh, whether it's a kibble. And so you wind up having to get this blend in your formulation of, you know, adding the different constituents. Too much fiber makes it really hard and cakey and difficult to eat, and it falls apart. You know, too little fiber, you know, too much carbs, too little carbs, same thing. It's a real blend and art to figuring that out. So there are limitations technically from a production and processing standpoint, but I believe that most American adults and most dogs are woefully receiving too little fiber. And I think that that's one of the things that we've seen, especially with our approach to dog food and formulation, is that by increasing specifically the beta glucan of the fibers, that these dogs just, you know, there's been a lot of improvements in stool regularity, you know, and it boosts the immune system. There's some really fascinating research around that. So can't give you a hard and fast number, but 6%, yeah, that's kind of standard. And I tend to push towards the higher. The reason that these things have gone lower in fiber over the years is because the push towards higher animal proteins, animal meats. One of the reasons that, in addition to my own personal beliefs and concerns about climate change and animal welfare, that I really look at plant-based proteins is because, remember, the difference between a plant-based protein and an animal-based protein has to do with the cell wall. Animal proteins have a cell membrane, so there's really nothing in there. There can be some fats and water, but cell walls of plants contain these fibers. And so this is why we've kind of gone towards yeast and fungal-based proteins, because about 10% of each cell is this type of fiber that I'm talking about. So that's one of the big advantages of like plant-based proteins versus, you know, animal or meat-based proteins. And I think that's when you look at some of the human long-term studies on health of vegetarian diets versus, you know, heavy meat, processed meat, you wind up finding, oh, well, the health outcomes may be attributed to the fibers. So great question. But, you know, we wouldn't recommend like a 30% fiber for your dog. I think you'd see severe consequences.
Okay, there's a few questions asking for clarification on things you mentioned earlier. Someone wants clarification on the reduction that spaying and neutering causes.
Yes. So in general, it's a 20 to 30% reduction in the daily caloric needs. So spaying and neutering automatically reduces the energy requirements for a dog or a cat, as you would expect, because they're not going through different cycles. There's different tissues that have been removed. So in general terms, we use 20 to 30% reduction in daily caloric needs post spay or neuter. And honestly, you know, one of the things that Alex and I have done over the past few years, we kept seeing this thing. I used to say it was the 9-month, you know, curve. So we would see dogs and cats and we'd track them over the first, you know, couple of years of life. And we would see that the cohort would like go normal weight, you know, normal weight gain, right, based on the body growth. And then around 9 months of age, it just shoots up. And when we started doing the backwards detective work, you realize, oh, many of these dogs in the US were being spayed or neutered at 6 months of age. And there was a big inflection point, because what happened was, and again, this is you've got to really know your dog, and you're starting to hear people like me and others, you know, for the past 10 years, we've been saying, maybe we need to delay when we spay or neuter. But regardless, they kept feeding them same amounts. And so suddenly reduce that that caloric demand, and boom, they just took off. And the other thing too about the 9-month, there's a really important research that we've done, and Alex and others around the world have done. And really around 9 months of age, I can with near certainty tell you with almost absolute certainty, a cat, if they're going to develop obesity at 9 months of age, and then a dog, I'd say I'm probably like 95% certain if they're going to develop obesity, because we can look at those curves. Now, Dr. German, and you can get them through Royal Canin. They have all kinds of amazing growth curves. So again, when we're looking at the puppy and kitten end of things, we now have started to really reformulate and rethink how weight gain should be during that first year of life. But that was a long way around the mulberry bush, but hopefully it gave you some additional context and color.
One more thing for clarification, she said, you said we should not reduce the calories below 70% of RER. Could you remind us what RER stands for?
Yeah, resting energy requirements. So those formulas that I was showing you there in that slide that talked about, like 70 times body weight in kilograms to the 3/4 power, or those things. So 30 times kilograms plus 70. So those are what we largely or loosely call resting energy requirements. There's a lot of different resting energy requirement formulas. Those were the ones that we agreed upon, both in the AHA guidelines as well as the global pet obesity position statement. So, we've tried to sort of settle on the most commonly used calculations. But again, if you are thinking I can just feed my dog less, you're going to run into you're most likely going to run into nutritional deficiencies at some point. And this is why, it is danger zone to go below 70% of the total amount of resting energy requirements, because again, as I'll reiterate, you're at risk then of reducing the essential nutrients that your dog needs to survive. And so I have seen this too often with pet owners who just decide they're going to feed their dog half as much, and 3 months later, it's got serious problems.
Similarly, somebody would like, similar to the fiber question, she says, what % of protein should we be looking for in foods?
Yeah, I can't stress enough, it's an individual. There's no best or right or whatever. I will say, if you look at the literature, now we're going to confine this to weight loss, it's going to be north of 30%. Okay, so that's sort of when we start to look at what the therapeutic diets are formulating, you're going to wind up in that 30% range. There might be 28 or 29 in a few instances. There might be 33, 34 in others, but you're going to kind of see that pocket. And again, you have to understand that when you're formulating the food, where's the other 70% coming from? And so this is where fibers and carbs and fats come into play. And of course, you've got to have your vitamins and minerals, which may have something that's carrying those as well with a small amount of calories. So in general, when I'm looking at it, I typically think of weight loss diets as starting around 30%.
Lisa, did you have any questions come in on Facebook? I do have a couple more on Zoom, but they're more specific requirements, like dogs with renal issues and dogs with stone issues. So I wanted to see if there were any Facebook questions maybe we could address.
Yeah, I think most of them have been covered, and we're actually out of time. We're at a minute after 2. So I think that we will stop here, but I want to thank you so much, Dr. Ward, for this presentation. It was incredibly informative. I hope that our audience learned as much as I did. And any other last words that you want to leave folks with?
The main thing is just to have an ally in your veterinary team, because, as you're kind of starting to sense, there's a lot of nuance and variables at play that, really it just takes a lot of different sort of thinking around it. And I find that what I think the take-home message is be prepared to shift and change. There is no right size that works forever. As I mentioned, the step weight loss, this every 90 days shifting, what you're doing is adapting to the physiology that is changing in response. I mean, one thing that our body is really good at doing is preservation. So if you suddenly reduce the amount of calories, fats, proteins, carbs, whatever it may be, you put additional exercise load on, we adapt to it. And so we've got to be really cognizant and aware of where those adaptations are occurring, so that when we hit these plateaus, and most of you that are watching this have had a plateau. You've tried to lose weight and you got to the last 5 pounds, it won't go off. You have to change something, right? So this is what we talk about with the 90-day rule and the step weight loss, because we find that that helps us always stay in a dynamic flux with the body's physiological adaptation. So, you know, there can be a dog that starts off with a 35% protein and a 13 or 14% fiber. And then by the end of the 6-month period, you know, they're down to a 27% protein and a 6% fiber, because that's just the changes that we had to make. So I would just encourage you to make sure that this is not something that, you know, you just take lightly and you try to do on your own. Work with your veterinary professionals and really make sure that you are monitoring this closely, because otherwise you will wind up wasting a lot of time. And that is the most frustrating thing for me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we have recorded this webinar, so it will be available for folks to listen to again or share with friends and colleagues. I hope you will. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Ward, and thank you all of you for tuning in, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.